Hey everyone, time for some more chocolate stories and history. So this week, as we're coming up to December and the Christmas season, I thought I would talk about advent calendars. You know, the little calendars that you get where you open the door and you get a treat inside. This is one that I bought for my kids from Divine. My grown-up calendar hasn't come yet, but I thought I'd talk a little bit about what Advent is, where Advent calendars started, and how did chocolate become involved in all of that. So let's start with Advent. So Advent is a season in the liturgical year, a time of waiting and preparation and celebration of the Nativity of Christ. So in Latin, Adventus means coming and arrival. In the New Testament of the Bible, it was used as a term for the second coming of Christ. We have evidence in the 4th and 5th century that in Spain, Advent was a season where it was a season of preparation for baptism of new Christians, which happened in January at the Feast of Epiphany. So it had little to no ties to Christmas at all. By the 6th century, we have evidence of Roman Christians tying Advent to the second coming of Christ. It wasn't until the Middle Ages that we have evidence that Advent became explicitly tied to the birth of Christ. So you know that the liturgical calendar is a religious calendar or a calendar of worship. It's slightly different for different religions, like Eastern Orthodox has different times to do feasts versus Roman Catholic. And so that's why Easter seems to move every year, or Lent, Pentecost. So that's why these things seem to move. They're based on the liturgical calendar. So Advent technically starts the first Sunday after the Feast of St. Andrew. And now it is all about preparation for the Nativity of Christ. So it's the four Sundays before Christmas Eve. So the Advent calendar itself can be traced back to Protestants in the mid-1800s. So they wouldn't have an Advent calendar like this with doors or little treats or anything. It was more like a marking of time. So some of the things that they did was chalk lines on doors to mark the time before Advent, or an Advent clock, or Advent candles, which is remarkably similar to Hanukkah, but they would light a candle each day, or an Advent wreath, where you would have an evergreen wreath and you would light one of the candles each Sunday before Advent, and possibly a fifth one on Christmas Eve. So some of these traditions are still kind of carried over in Europe, and this was a thing that happened mostly in Christian Europe. So the Advent calendars that we know today, there's 3 possible places where it could have started. The first is in 1903 with a Protestant bookstore in Austria. They just printed them off. There was no little gifts. It was just a little calendar that you mark the days. Then the second one is in 1904, where an Advent calendar was inserted into newspapers as a gift for readers. Again, no doors, just like a printed piece of paper, and you would just mark the time. The person who is usually credited with inventing the Advent calendar happened in 1908 in Germany. His name was Gerhard Lang. And when he was little, he had an awesome mother who made him an Advent calendar with 24 little candies stuck onto like a piece of cardboard. When Gerhard Lang grew up, he became part of a printing company called Reichhold and Lang, and they produced pictures that you would tack to cardboard, kind of like his mother tacked the candies on. So they were religiously themed pictures counting down the Advent. No doors, no windows, no treats or candy at this time. You would probably not recognize it as an advent calendar that we see today. So you get further into the 20th century, he starts to print advent calendars with little doors. So he's got the little flaps, but usually it's just behind the flap is a picture or a Bible verse or something to help commemorate the nativity of Christ. Other competitors started to copy him at the time, and then we have the 1930s. The 1930s came along and Lang went out of business. He had, by then, about 30 advent calendar designs as part of his portfolio. You would be surprised, actually, how many dietary habits we have that came out of the 1930s. It's a really interesting time. Anyway, that's a sidebar for another day. World War II comes along, affects everybody. And with shortages and rationing of paper and cardboard, advent calendars are put on hold, no advent calendars. But after the war, they are started back up. So like I said, they at this time are mostly Europeans who are using the advent calendars. In the 1950s, they really shot to popularity in the United States when Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was then the President of the United States, was photographed opening an advent calendar with his grandkids. So where did the chocolates and treats come in? So after the war, chocolates and treats were added to keep the attention of the kids. So to keep the attention of the children, you give them chocolates and treats. Now, today, if you go Google advent calendars, almost all of the advent calendars that you come up with are not religious in nature. So when I was researching this, I was looking for different kinds of calendars you can get. And there I saw ones for tea and wine and cosmetics and cat treats and dog treats and socks and ties and perfume and beer and hot sauce and Lego and nuts and what else? Coffee, popcorn, pasta, and of course chocolates and truffles and bonbons. So I was actually looking for the most expensive advent calendar that you could buy, and I couldn't find the information for this year, but last year it was a Tiffany & Co. They're a jewelry company in New York, and you got 24 gifts, and it had a cost of 112,000 American dollars. I did not get a Tiffany calendar last year. I just had chocolate. The most expensive advent calendar of all time was a Porsche advent calendar. And let me read to you. This only happened in 2010. They only made 5. They only had, I think, it's very vague how they worded it. They said they only had interest in one. I don't know if that means the person actually bought one or not, but this was what was in it. So it was $1 million. It stood 2 meters tall, rendered from brushed aluminum, looks more like a sophisticated art installation than a festive timetable. But behind the 24 luminous windows were the real surprises. They included 18-karat gold sunglasses, aluminum fountain pens, a lambskin jacket, a limited edition chronograph watch, a designer kitchen, and to crown it all, a luxury 8-meter yacht. Needless to say, I didn't get one of those last year either. So there was only 5 made. The idea was to have one sold on each continent. I don't know how that went, so they don't really say. But they haven't offered it again since, so I don't know. So as you're shopping for your advent calendars or enjoying your advent calendars this year, I would suggest that you try and find ones that are made with ethically produced chocolate with people who care about the craft chocolate business and with people who are putting flavor ahead of everything else. So the one that I got for my kids was from Divine. It was one of the inexpensive ones. I got myself one from Soma, and I've posted lots of other ideas for advent calendars on my Instagram if you're interested. So I hope that was interesting to you, that you learned something about why we eat chocolate in advent calendars. And if you like this video, make sure to subscribe so you'll get some more history or chocolate stories every week. See you then.